Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to warmly welcome all AIIC members and friends to this beautiful St. Ethelburga Center for Peace and Reconciliation. Welcome to all those joining online as well. We could not have chosen a better venue for the topics we'll be discussing tonight. Tonight, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of AIIC, the Global International Association of Conference Interpreters. And, well, all colleagues know, but for the guests, the association was founded a few years after the Nuremberg trials, where simultaneous interpreting was extensively used for the first time. And therefore, it's often referred to the birth of our profession. And conference and simultaneous interpreters regard the Nuremberg trials as the birth of a profession. Since then, interpreters have worked in trials at courts around the world, including in Europe at the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights, Courts of Justice of the European Union, to name but a few. And the ICC is already investigating allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide committed during the ongoing war in Ukraine, sadly, and more cases will inevitably follow. But here we have an esteemed panel of experts. We're very lucky to have an amazing panel of speakers with us tonight who will be discussing these very issues of linguistic justice, focusing in particular on human rights, languages in courts, and exploring what happens when rare languages are needed. And our first guest would be Eleanor Sharpston. We're particularly honored and delighted to have Eleanor with us tonight because she is a great friend of interpreters. And she grew up in Brazil, Switzerland, France, and Austria. And she was an undergraduate at King's College, Cambridge, and studied a mixture of economics, modern languages, French and Spanish, and eventually studied law. And then she was called to the bar by Middle Temple and commenced her career as the European lawyer practicing in Brussels. And she then worked for 3 years as a referendaire, the judicial assistant at the Court of Justice of the AIIC in Luxembourg, working for Advocate General and later Judge Sir Gordon Slynn. And that cemented her commitment to the European project. And for the next 15 years, Eleanor combined practice at the bar in London with the academic inclination. Initially, she taught at the UCL, subsequently at Cambridge, and given this background, she specialized in all things European, both EU and European Court of Human Rights. She took silk, became a Queen's Counsel in 1999. And between 2006 and 2020, Eleanor served as an Advocate General at the Court of Justice of the EU in Luxembourg and presented more than 340 opinions on many major aspects of EU constitutional, substantive and procedural law. She now serves as a member of the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee, that is the supervisory body under the aegis of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And she will be returning to Cambridge for this academic year, as already mentioned. And Eleanor she is a real Renaissance person. She has so many off-duty interests in theater and sport and naturally languages. And Eleanor tells us that she's usually to be found with her two beloved hounds, Boris the Samoyed and Rudy the Havavart. Did I pronounce those correctly? Havavart, it's the German, it's the Middle German, isn't it? Yeah. She loves the favorite locations, Eleanor tells us, are Luxembourg, Tuscany, or in a camper van somewhere en route between the two. And we are very delighted to have you with us tonight, Eleanor. You worked with so many different contexts. Would you comment, where has linguistic justice best been served, and where have there been shortcomings?
Thank you for that embarrassingly long introduction. Unfortunately, this ancient building is not fitted with a trapdoor, so it was not possible for me to disappear during it. But please write down about half of what you just heard. The question you asked me is a very good one, and unsurprisingly, the answer has got something to do with the amount of resources that is available and being dedicated to the need for interpretation in order to deliver justice. In terms of my own experience, the context in which linguistic justice has best been served, unsurprisingly, is the context of the Court of Justice of the European Union. That is because the court knows that without very good interpreters who are given a decent chance to prepare the file, there is no chance at all that we, the members of the court, are going to understand what's going on and be able to decide the case. And so at the court, we have in-house interpreters. We also have a number of excellent freelance interpreters. And my understanding from my many interpreter friends is they are indeed given the full papers and they are given preparation time. Both of those may seem like impossible luxuries to those who work in less privileged surroundings. Even with that, it is very difficult sometimes to work with the 24 languages which are the languages of the European Union. And of course, sometimes the interpretation has to operate via a relay. It is remarkably unlikely that you are going to find a Finnish mother tongue interpreter who speaks Greek, unless perchance his mama happens to be Greek. So what will happen will be interpretation from Greek into, say, English or German, and then from English or German into Finnish. And inevitably, if it's on a relay, we all know that however good the interpreter, and the interpreters are extremely good, you're going to lose through the relay. So that's the kind of Rolls-Royce deluxe version. At the other extreme is the poor harassed interpreter who has been pulled in at zero notice in a busy magistrate's court because they realize that the defendant actually cannot understand a single word that's being said to them. And the interpreter has been asked if they speak Indian languages. Quite. I see the reactions right here on the panel, and my reaction would be the same. I mean, it would be a bit like asking somebody, do you speak European languages? Yes, sure, which one do you mean? So, I mean, that really is the other extreme, and the interpreter may be professionally trained, they may be somebody who is a well-intentioned member of the same linguistic community who's going to try to do their best, but you will appreciate, obviously, that that is the other end of the scale from the provision that is made by the Court of Justice through the budget to try to have a more assured level of interpretation.
That's thank you so much, Eleanor. So obviously, it really greatly helps having some modern languages and appreciating the work and the knowledge that goes into them. How did your knowledge of modern languages inform your legal career?
Well, I didn't actually set out to be an EU lawyer, but if I had been trying to design an academic background stand me in the best possible stead for that career, it would have been a background that combined economics and modern languages and law. And I'm even going to be a little bit iconoclastic here and say, I think it's a good idea I only did 1 year's law. No, really, 1 year's academic law before I did my professional qualifications and went to the bar. I say that for the following reason. If you train fully in a legal system, you naturally imbibe with that the idea that your legal system is the best. Because it's the obvious way of doing things, isn't it? It's the way you were taught to do law. And so it is better than all these other benighted legal systems that do not benefit from being your legal system. Now, if you do only 1 year's law, you are, to a very large extent, you are spared from making that assumption because you don't know your own legal system that well, and so you may have a slightly more open mind towards other legal systems. I certainly think that my background in modern languages led me very naturally into comparative law, of which I did a certain amount when I was at Cambridge, and before that when I was at UCL. And very obviously it was EU law, and also I suspect that my nomadic existence and my languages, my first one being Portuguese when I went to Brazil because I wanted to play football with the boys in the street. I mean, come on. No good being a small white girl with pigtails wanting to play football if you can't speak Portuguese. Não é possível. So, I think that the languages also probably contributed very heavily to the fact that my professional career was not spent in the UK. I was working out, I've actually spent more of my professional life in Luxembourg than anywhere else, but I have spent chunks of it in, for example, Belgium. And I grew up, as you gave too full a version of the CV, you've already heard this. And I'm sure that the modern languages, it's chicken and egg. Because I spoke other languages, it was not an issue going and living somewhere else. And when I wanted to take Luxembourgish nationality, okay, I had to learn Luxembourgish and pass the test in Luxembourgish. What is Luxembourgish? It's a wonderful mixture of French and German. Sprinkle a little Dutch on the top, do up the screw top jar, shake, pour out, you will get Luxembourgish.
Extraordinary. So you certainly would be well placed to advise on cultural and institutional differences and the difference in approach from lawyers trade in common law and continental law system. I think they really have to go on an exchange to make it compulsory to actually see that there is no one best legal system. And of course, obviously, there is a bit of convergence. And Eleanor, you are an extraordinary speaker, but you're so well, I wouldn't say trained, you trained yourself having so many languages to work with interpreters. When you work with interpreters, does it affect how you express yourself? Are you aware of the interpreters being there, or do you forget that they're there?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And I am aware, and it is my job to put the interpreter, who will be good and will be trying to do their very best job, it is my job as the speaker, as the originator of the language, to make sure that I give the interpreter something which is clear and which is easy to convey vividly and accurately. That's my job. I mean, I know what I want to say. The interpreter is not meant to be a mind reader, nor are they meant to have to deal with the stream of monotonous sound that comes out at 200 miles an hour with sentences that are constructed like a Gothic cathedral. You know, if the speaker produces that and there's a problem in interpretation, it's not the interpreter's fault. So absolutely I am aware, and also aware because I am used to speaking English to people who do not have English as their first language. And so it is therefore, perhaps this is because my parents brought me up this way, I always understood that it was my job as the native speaker to make sure that I provided something which was easy to understand, which, by the way, you can do without being boring or without being limited in the you use. It's entirely possible to be vivid and yet to be very clear. There's a final point, which is that as a child, I used to stutter. This is a strange confession for a barrister, But I used to stutter, and I had to learn how to overcome that. And so naturally, I tend to get the sentence ready in my mind, and then I play it out on the next piece of breath, and then I take another breath, and I put out the next sentence, which makes me much easier to interpret, I know, than somebody who runs all the sentences together very, very fast.
Brilliant. I wish all the speakers we interpret at the High Court setting would as carefully construct and logically serve up and think of us just work shadowing there and trying to keep up. And of course, the stenographers are pegged to our interpretation sometimes. Yes, and were there any occasions, Eleanor, when there was a misunderstanding, actually, as a result of the interpretation?
I can think of a number of occasions before the courts where the speaker was trying to be opaque, and they succeeded all too well because they managed to conceal their meaning from the interpreter, who produced something, and then you listen to it, you thought they can't be saying that, because actually that contradicts something I remember they put in their pleadings. So it's really unlikely that that is what they are saying. If that happened in a case where I was sitting as Advocate General, actually I regarded it as part of my job in a way that was courteous to the speaker and to the interpreters, to try to clarify and say, I'm sorry, I would just like to press you on that. Are you really saying that it is your considered submission that the moon is made of blue cheese and that the sun rises in the west? I just like to make sure I have an accurate note of what you are submitting to the court. That usually did the job.
Yes, and quite often, obviously, it's a very pressurized job to be a witness or an expert witness. And yes, indeed, sometimes people do kind of forget for a moment what's their name and address and where they went to school. And was the sun rising in the west? Oh, need to double check my notes. And, and the interpreter only, of course, has to say what they just heard. And interpreters are trying, of course, to do the thought process. And do you form a working relationship with interpreters who are trying to become you, to do an understudy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was very lucky that at the court there were some exceptionally able interpreters, both on the full-time staff and among the freelancers. And there was a very good, very close working relationship, I would venture to say with a lot of mutual respect, because I think you guys are magicians, white magicians, you understand. But I really, really have a lot of respect for the technical competence and for the sheer feat of doing simultaneous interpretation. And I have, as clear as if it were yesterday, I can remember when I went to a meeting at UNIDO in Vienna. Because it was the UN in Vienna, German was exceptionally one of the additional languages. Normally, the UN languages do not include German, but in Vienna, at meetings, this can sometimes be allowed. And I was probably about 14 or 15, and I was half listening to the German and I was listening to the English interpreter. And there was a speaker who was producing an entire Gothic cathedral in one sentence. And of course, as you will be well aware, the problem about German is you need to guess what the verb is going to be at some stage. And the interpreter made an informed and intelligent guess what the verb might be. And we got to the end of the sentence, and then the speaker, unfortunately, added one final word. He said, nicht. And I can still hear it. The interpreter was brilliant. There's a rather sharp intake of breath. And then she said, everything I've just said, take it in the negative. And she went straight on. By the way, was the only possible thing to do. You could not have reconstituted this extraordinarily kind of cobweb-like sentence and then simultaneously been listening to the next sentence, which of course was coming out. So it was a brilliant professional choice under extreme pressure, and I've always remembered that.
It's a great workaround, yes, yeah. It's interesting, obviously, yes, there is the thing about the German, there are various things like that in other languages, and of course everyone has a different style. Some try to keep close to the hymn sheet in a sort of spoken translation style, staying very close to the original. Some try to offer, another school of interpreting says that one needs to offer interpretation, condense, and interpret the idea. Do you have a preference with interpreting styles?
Well, because my work has been legal work, I'm obviously going to say, you would expect me to say, it is naturally extremely important that the meaning should not be distorted, right? But I mean, that's not just true of the law, that is true of any area where a professional interpreter is working. Think of the carnage that arises in the diplomatic field if it is not reasonably accurate. Having said that, okay, when I was at the bar, when I was a junior barrister and we were going to Luxembourg to do cases in front of the court, my job as junior counsel was to listen to the French interpretation of what my leader was saying and to pass my leader a note if the interpretation had deviated or had been nuanced differently from what we had intended to say, and the note would say, do that point again, because it hasn't actually gone through properly. So that, I mean, if you like, I was acting as a check. I would hope, as an Advocate General, that when I was speaking, I chose language that could be conveyed vividly and accurately. As I said earlier, it is the responsibility of the speaker to produce something that can be understood and interpreted. I can certainly think of many occasions, possibly too many occasions, when I could see the interpreters looking a bit wild as the pleader became more and more kind of verbose and speeded up. Usually they speeded up because they realized that they had said to the court, they lied to the court, and they said, oh, I know I asked for 20 minutes for my speech, but actually I only need 15, Mr. President. What they meant was, if I turn the speed dial up to maximum, I may be able to gabble my way through it in 15 minutes. And I really can remember occasions when I said, as a native English speaker, listening to people speaking English, I hit the button on my microphone and I said, I'm so sorry. I am a native English speaker. I can't follow you at this speed. And please remember that my colleagues are listening to you through the interpretation. Please slow down. And usually the answer was, oh, Advocate General, I am so sorry. I will try to speak more slowly. But actually what I really want to say... And we were off again.
Guilty as charged. And many a closing submission was coming with that finish with a flourish, only to realize they'd just not been keeping up. And the stenographers were not keeping up, so the whole punchline was lost.
Am I allowed to tell what is probably my favorite interpretation story?
Please.
At least one person in this audience may have heard it before, but if so, don't shock me by giving the punchline. We are in an English language case, and we have counsel from the UK. It was when I was working as a referendaire, and the man I was working for, Sir Gordon Slynn, was the reporting judge. It was a case about dairy produce. And both Sir Gordon and counsel had totally forgotten that they were sitting in the Court of Justice of the European Communities in Luxembourg. They were back in the High Court in London, and they were having this kind of batted back forward and backwards between the bench and the bar that is one of the joys of English bar. And Sir Gordon asked a question, and counsel answered. And Sir Gordon asked another question, and counsel answered. Sir Gordon asked a final question, and counsel answered, and then he thought he'd be clever. And so what he actually did was to give the answer, and then he sort of smirked at the court, and you know when the counsel is going to be kind of oily, you know? He smirked at the court, and he said, "Indeed, my lord." He said, "Indeed, one might say, my lord, that what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, my lord." And Gordon smiled, and counsel simpered, the horrid way that barristers do when they think they've ingratiated themselves with the court. And the other members of the five-judge chamber and the Advocate General all sat there very, very politely with their hands cupped round their earpieces, waiting for the interpreters to tell them what the last remark was that counsel had made. And as you will well appreciate, there was absolute consternation among the interpreters. Frantic glances, you know, what is this? What on earth do you say? The situation was saved brilliantly by the French interpreter, a very senior interpreter, and in any case, the French interpretation channel is kind of the senior channel, yeah? She was so not amused. She leant forward, she punched the button on her microphone with a kind of viciousness, and in a voice that was so cold that it was about 50 degrees below absolute zero, she said, "Il vient de raconter une blague sur la volaille." He has just made a joke about poultry. It was very good because, of course, the members of the court smiled. I think one even laughed. Counsel was pleased because he thought, well, it took a little while, but, you know, it got through the interpretation okay. And, of course, I mean, we were all laughing at him. I mean, what a muppet.
Oh, gosh. Well, what does poultry have to do with a dairy case, after all? And, yeah, it's fascinating. Obviously, it's good. Interpreters sometimes do save the day. Sometimes, obviously, some cases could be quite emotional, and interpreters that work in court, should they, in your opinion, relay the emotions of the speakers in full? And if someone is thumping on the table, the interpreter should do the same in the booth, hitting everyone in their headphones. Or should they adopt a more neutral tone to cool the atmosphere?
Well, I suspect that what one does may perhaps be coloured by one's own background and one's own culture. There have been hearings at which I was listening to the English interpretation of a particular dry, very, very dry advocate, and the English interpreter was interpreting faithfully the dryness of the original. And then out of my eye, I caught the Italian booth, and the Italians were having a lot of fun with it. They were saying, well, I mean, you must be listening to the commission telling you water flows uphill. But I mean, you are intelligent judges. You're not going to listen to that, you know, and so on. So, I mean, I think there is probably a kind of golden mean. If what is being said is justly emotional, I think it is appropriate to convey a degree of emotion, not least because a kind of monotone relayed narrative of evidence, including, you know, rape and torture, is going to sound very, very weird. And if one is, this probably links on something we may be talking about later, but if you are trying to assess the credibility of the narrative and what is being said is so far away from the original, that may in fact undermine credibility. But at the other end of the scale, ladies and gentlemen, you, the interpreters, you are not zombies and you are not robots. You are human beings. You may need some distance if what you are being asked to interpret is genuinely harrowing. You know, you may not be able to do your professional job to explain to the court what is being said if you allow yourself to get so wrapped up in the enormous emotion that it sort of overwhelms you. So, I mean, I would not, we never had that kind of a case before the court in which I served, but I can well imagine in the International Criminal Court that you could have precisely that. And I would not be so bold as to tell the interpreter in that context what they should or shouldn't do. I bow to other expertise around this table on that point.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And Andrew is one of the experts in training the AIIC interpreters, in particular involved in training speakers of rare languages to interpret. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
I think I should say, so everybody knows, I do pre-trial court work and I do court work, but I'm not part of the investigation phase. You could get a speaker from the International Criminal Court who could tell you all about how they source a huge number of languages and conduct investigation in the fields in a massive number of different areas and how they do it. Unfortunately, that person's not me. However, I would really like to pick up some of the themes that were mentioned here because they're massively important, I think, in these discussions. If we talk about the difference between conference interpreting, court interpreting, interpreting international criminal proceedings is one aspect. We mentioned the issue of visibility, how visible the interpreter can be. I think is very different in a conference setting and in a court environment. We mentioned the word faithfully. What is interpreting faithfully in a conference setting? What is interpreting faithfully in a courtroom setting? Do you interpret differently? How much is verbatim? How much is summary? What about omission? What about hesitation? Credibility, how do you assess credibility, particularly in DI, with somebody on the screen? So these are, if I could just touch on some of these issues. For example, I was in the trial, Protest Zigiranzirazo in the Rwanda tribunal was actually my first experience of video conference interpreting, which was quite an interesting trial because there was a defendant who couldn't go to, not a defendant, sorry, there was a defendant who couldn't come to Holland where the witness was, and there was the witness who couldn't go to Arusha where the Rwanda trial was. So they decided to hold the court sessions in Camp Zeist. Zeist will be a name which some of the older ones amongst you might remember as the place where the Lockerbie trial was held. So a prison with a full interpreting facility there. And so I went along to this. So I was in Camp Zeist for a week in interpreting at this event. So you had the witness there. and they'd considered the witness testimony sufficiently important basically to move almost the entire courtroom structure over. And at the time, so the judges were there, etc. But the defendant, Protest Sigranzirazu, was actually in Arusha at the time with his counsel. And so I was interpreting, and we did that for a week. My voice was broadcast over to Arusha with the other interpreters. And there it was. We got the evidence, the court moved back, etc. And later, I found out that every single bit of that evidence taken then was thrown out on the basis that the accused had the right to be physically present at his own trial, or to be present. It was deemed that physical presence wasn't the same as virtual presence, and he was acquitted of genocide, actually. So so that was my first experience of a video conference interpreting, which I've always taken a big interest in ever since. And I want to say something about DI and justice as well, because I think this is really important, that, distance interpreting, I'll just say a bit about it, it has to be an enabler, not a disabler. It has to, if it gives people access to justice that they wouldn't otherwise get, and going on to the subject of languages with lesser diffusion, if, for example, you can find a Hindi speaker in a remote part of northern Norway who can speak to the courts, yeah, that's great. But if that person isn't there, what can you do, and how can you get access to an experienced interpreter in time? So it can be times, and it goes for legal, it goes for health, it goes for other public service settings, where it can actually give access to a qualified interpreter where there would not have otherwise been access to that interpreter. So I think there are some interesting initiatives there. I just wanted to mention that very, very briefly. In terms of we talk about linguistic justice, so we should never forget that justice is not just justice for the victims, it's justice for the victims, it's an appropriate judicial framework for the witnesses who come and testify, some of whom might be vulnerable witnesses, some of them might be protected witnesses. I can't say too much about that, but obviously if video conference is an option whereby somebody can, if you like, virtually leave the country without being seen, without getting on a flight, without any trace, give evidence and then get back to that country, that's a very powerful tool when it comes to gathering evidence for trial. In terms of vulnerable witnesses, you see it here with children testifying in court. If a lot of the vulnerable witnesses we interpret, rape victims, etc., people whose children were killed in front of them, etc., I think it really helps them to have that opportunity to be able to be beamed into the court and speak like that. And justice for the accused as well. So the accused also has the right to linguistic justice. And what does this mean in practice? In practice, the accused have the right to know what they're accused of. They have the right to know what the witness statements say. And one particularly challenging job I had was as part of the training and with an Arab-speaking colleague, Ahmed, if he's watching, hello. We work training interpreters with Zagawa. And as it happens, Zagawa is not a written language. So we had lots of evidence, witness testimony that was in English, and it had to be translated. So what we normally do is they get provided with written witness statements and in whatever languages they speak. What do you do when it's not a spoken language? So in that case, what we had to do was basically, well, after the training, which was fairly complex already, and I'll talk more about it, we had to basically get every single paragraph of the witness statement, cut them up line by line with audio recordings, and make it possible that by pressing on the right number of the witness statement and then the right paragraph of the witness statement, that the relevant paragraph could be played to the Zagawa speaking accused. So it was quite an effort, but it did mean that the accused in that case could understand every single paragraph against him in a language that he fully spoke and understands. So I think it's important that we also remember the rights of the accused when we talk about linguistic justice. It's justice for everybody. But I think I do have to say a special word for the the victims and the witnesses that we're their voice, that anything that gives, these people a voice is good.
Yeah, it's a bit benign use of technology in this case as well. Also, Andrew, you advised on his book, Katie Kitamore's Intimacies book, very good book, a page turner, which describes some aspects of the ICC work. And have you actually yourself experienced any situations, or any situations that are faced by the main character in the book? The main character, I have to say in the book, she is offered a job, an offer of a permanent job as an interpreter at the ICC after showing her mettle in a very difficult case, similar to what Andrew was describing. And is there a particular profile of a person who is actually a good fit for the ICC? And the quote from the book was, people that had the right temperament for the job, but at what internal cost? So they have to be able to do that kind of separation.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I must admit I was surprised when I appeared in the book, to be honest, because the original interviews I did, I thought she was a PhD student, and often anybody, if somebody comes, I normally speak to anyone if they're PhD students or whoever, but no, I read the book much later, actually, after it came out, and yeah, I could definitely see some things I could identify. Can't really talk about all of them, but just one thing. I think I would disagree with actually some of, in terms of my experience, in terms of what she writes in the fictional novel. There are things I'd really agree with from my own experience and things I differ with. There are times when she describes, being nervous and everything, and I have to say, when I sort of opened the interpreting for the first day of the first trial, with the first, accused, etc. This was, and it was a big moment. And as I saw all the sort of, assembled diplomats and everybody there, I was kind of thinking, no, and there was giant screens and it was being broadcast all over the world live. I was kind of thinking, there must be easier ways of earning a living than this. But you click on the mic and you listen, and then you're just in it. It just flows, luckily. One thing I had a very different experience. I have a very different experience interpreting if it's at the detention centre or whatever. That I actually find all the accused people I interpret for are very grateful, and I think that what you were saying about you almost develop a relationship with them. Certainly, it's been my case that I've been to interpret for one detained person, and another one might have seen me and will have waved or something. So, there's this acknowledgement there. So my own experience is that they're immensely grateful to have that linguistic assistance.
The human connection as well.
Absolutely. In terms of the human connection, you do develop a relationship, and I mean, it's not really a relationship, but you sit in the trial every day with that person, so you develop, I don't know what you develop, actually. I don't, trust me. You develop, there's some kind of connection. And particularly if you follow the whole trial, and you know the person, you don't know them, but you've certainly met them in other contexts, then, when it comes to sentences, etc. I remember Thomas Lubanga's speech very well. It was sad for me.
Yeah, sometimes in commercial litigation, they don't like using the same interpreters that worked with witnesses in meetings. Yeah. And the trial, it's a completely new, clean sheet, completely independent team. Well, there might be something in it, but it's still, human connection is super, super important. I call it an understudy. It's like you actually becoming that person for that time, that you have to accurately reflect what the person is saying. In the question.
This is just what I wanted to say about faithfully, because we had the neutrally, etc. I mean, to me, I think it's, and we're not interpreting for a normal audience. So we're interpreting for people who want to assess demeanor. What does this mean? This means they're not just listening to the words. They don't just want to understand the story. They want to know, is this person telling the truth? That's a completely different way of listening to other settings. Well, you can say sometimes politicians, they might want to know if they're telling the truth or not.
I agree. Say you have the double smoke screen of remote and hybrid here, and 60% they say is non-verbal. So we help, but we only help with this.
Yeah. And then, particularly when people don't have that great image of the speaker, I think it's all the more important that we reflect and mirror to the greatest possible extent their manner of speech. The hesitation, is particularly important. Repetitions, silences, all this stuff, they're all incredibly important. I always give an example of how words can be completely different. If you were doing an investigation and somebody said, police officer, where were you last night? Or even in court, so, I was in Paris. Yes, I was in Paris. And you interpret, I was in Paris. It might be the same words, but the meaning is completely different. To somebody assessing demeanor, it's a completely different thing. So that's why we if you like, we're much more verbatim in courtroom in international criminal proceedings than we would be otherwise. But I know the clock's running, but I just want to say, another thing I want to pick on, my job, which was said so wonderfully earlier. I think we have to remember that a multilingual court isn't just a court with interpreters thrown at it, job done. A multilingual court, an effective multilingual court, is an environment where each party, every single actor in the process, knows what their role is in ensuring effective multilingual communication in international judicial proceedings. And I think this is really important because counsel have a role to play, the judges have a role to play, the interpreters have a role to play. We all play our part, and I believe that when we all work together, then we can really achieve something that's great. This doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, that there are no misunderstandings. There will be misunderstandings, and we do make mistakes. A translator has 2,000 words to do in 8 hours per day, generally. An interpreter will cover 2,000 words at 120 words a minute in about 16 minutes. Can I produce the same level of accuracy in 16 minutes as a translator can in 8 hours with resources and being able to see the end of the text before the beginning? I can't, okay? But what we can do is we can take the transcript, because we have a transcript, I would speak about that first time, and we can correct it, we can find things, counsel can submit, what's this, we can look at it. And I correct myself on mic in terms of interpreter intervention. When we know we've made a mistake, we put our hand up and we say, the interpreter corrects, it wasn't this, it was that. So, but I know I could say a lot more, but I'd really like to hear from the other speakers as well.
All hail to the professionals. I wish we could stop the clock or at least play for extra time. We have so many good questions to each and every one of you. We have Maria Cocis here with us, who will talk about the human rights aspects from the points of Amnesty. What is the importance of interpreting for Amnesty, Maria? Because Amnesty volunteer teams, many of them are AIIC interpreters. And how important is that relationship between Amnesty and AIIC?
Of course. Thank you for your question. Well, as you know, Amnesty is an NGO that fights for human rights causes worldwide, and the Language Resource Center at the International Secretariat, which provides language services, and that includes both translation and interpreting, is actually key and has a crucial contribution to advancing the human rights agenda. Amnesty strives to use communication and language strategically to obtain their goals, which is to raise awareness and mobilize communities around the world to report human rights violations, but also to creating opportunities for advocacy work and for human rights education. Now, in order to help further evolve the norms and practices that would protect human rights, Amnesty needs to build bridges amongst the communities and with all stakeholders. And the way in which we provide support from the Interpretation and Multilingual Engagement Unit is by providing interpretation services, which allows all stakeholders involved to actually do the listening and engaging exercise that's needed to take further action. As you can imagine, translation and interpreting is also key for Amnesty to amplify voices. One of the ways in which can help Amnesty remain relevant and being impactful is by supporting with translation and interpreting services. And within our remit at the unit, that means providing all sorts of interpretation services for meetings with stakeholders, including UN-related bodies, civil societies, organizations, special rapporteurs, but also meetings in which Amnesty develops an agenda or creates campaigns or workshops with activists worldwide. We are currently providing support to all the movements, so our model has changed quite a lot because our remit has expanded. We started back in the time 20 years ago with very few meetings, and now we are providing support to the whole movement. And we are providing interpretation into up to 15 language combinations. And over the years, we have collaborated with more than 1,200 conference interpreters. And as you were saying, many of them are AIIC members and AIIC pre-candidates as well. And the translation unit, in turn, provides translation services into 90 language combinations. So that's quite an important bit as well. Besides the external reach, translation and interpreting is also key internally for Amnesty as an organization. Andrew just mentioned that being multilingual does not only mean providing languages and providing interpretation. You need to go one step further. So multilingualism is a core asset at Amnesty, and language is understood as a tool to promote positive change. It is used to contribute to combating racism and other forms of discrimination. And therefore, linguistic equity is one of the key words, which will hopefully be one of the main principles at Amnesty in the future. So we also provide interpretation support internally at Amnesty to help create and sustain diverse and inclusive working environments, and to make sure that language rights are part of the individual human rights that are recognized by international law.
Maria, thank you so much, and thank you for all the wonderful work that Amnesty is doing. We are all in awe of what Amnesty is doing, and always happy to help to the volunteers. Thank you so much.
I think you were asking about the importance of the collaboration with AIIC as well. That's definitely key for us. First of all, because we believe that all associations and organizations within the conference interpreting field should be aligned in terms of sharing a vision and also ensuring that we set the same objectives as we promote developments in the field, whether they are technical, technological. I think that's very important. The fact that we collaborate with such a large pool also provides opportunity not only for networking, but also because we provide support across regions, we can work with the community of interpreters, and we can pair them with colleagues who will then provide them with job opportunities and very often support their application for AIIC membership. And in fact, the fact that meetings at Amnesty counts towards AIIC membership is crucial for us, because we believe we uphold the same standards, and it is also a way in which we can acknowledge the quality of the interpreters' work. Amnesty is not an institution, but we promote and we operate based on AIIC standards to make sure that interpreters are offered the best working conditions possible.
And it's wonderful to hear, and I'm sure our pre-candidates are taking notes. It's really, really wonderful to have you here tonight. We've got Besmir, who can speak from the interpreter's point of view. Besmir, could you please say a few words about your personal and professional experience working in international court, and perhaps what led you to write the book Linguistic Justice?
Yes, of course. Hi, good evening, everyone. I have to tell you, I love this conversation tonight. I think it's absolutely amazing. I'm just so grateful that we got all together, and especially for such an amazing, during such an amazing opportunity. I mean, AIIC is 70, you know? If it wasn't for AIIC, we would still be considered vagabonds and paid peanuts, right? So let's give it up for AIIC. I'm just going to touch upon several things that you guys said, Ms. Eleanor, at people who were scrutinizing transcripts existed in IMT, International military tribunal in Nuremberg. They were called interpretation monitors. It would be really an amazing idea if we had interpretation monitors at international criminal tribunals as we know today. It would take a lot of, it would save so much time, you know, and these would be purely linguistic people who would approach what has been said from linguistic point of view. Lawyers will always try to, you know, tweak, but linguists, we reflect the language. Also, Andrew, I have to tell you, I was sitting here and I was feeling kind of grateful. You said that you felt for the perpetrator, and I was kind of hiding it for myself, you know, all these years. But I also felt for a perpetrator that I interpreted for very, very intensely during 2 weeks. And you know, I'm very happy that you shared that, you know. I mean, and this guy, he wasn't like one of those command responsibility guys. He was like, you know, hardcore rapist and arsonist, and, you know, he was really nasty. 4 or 5 years ago, he remembered me. And colleagues wanted, from ICTY, they wanted to interview him. And he said from the prison, yes, he will consent to being interviewed only and exclusively if I come to interpret. But thank God for Corona, right? So that never materialized. Well, I am going to talk, I have a very difficult job here tonight. I'm going to talk about linguistic justice, about my academic work, a very little bit, and then I'm going to talk about this amazing movie that we made, The Inflow of Words. Let me begin with what would linguistic justice mean in the realm of the international criminal law today. Well, it would mean, my PhD is just that, linguistic justice. What are the conditions for the proper delivery of language services in situations where language itself plays the role in the conflict, right? So all these international criminal tribunals that we see today, basically we can say that all of them are dealing with ethnic conflict. You know, people hating each other only and exclusively because they're not Muslims or Jewish or Serbs or Croats or what have you. So hallmark of ethnic conflict is denial, right? I'm denying your culture, I'm denying your language, I'm denying your history. That's not you. That's just something that you took from my own culture, from my own language, from my own identity, and perverted it to suit your little petty interests, right? So in the sense, should interpreters working at courts adjudicating on ethnic crimes, should they be selected according to their ethnicity? In other words, is it okay? I'm going to name names because from my experience I'm speaking, right? If the victim is Muslim, should he be brought a Serbian interpreter? If the victim is Serbian and the perpetrator was Muslim, should he be brought a Muslim interpreter, and so on. So that is one of the questions, the ethnicity of an interpreter. I was called several times to interpret because the witness victim refused Serbian interpreter. Basically, they would tell them, listen, I have absolutely nothing against you. I can't. You know, I can't listen to you. I can't listen to your language. Cannot just go, you know. And this is, I have never been refused as an interpreter. And I mean, I think it would kind of crash me completely professionally. You know, somebody doesn't like me, what? And plus, that person is not there in his capacity of a Serb. That person is there in his capacity of a vetted professional who is hired to do the job, right? Then, when we talk about linguistic justice in the realm of the international criminal law, we also have to talk about defense counsels. For example, did you know that at ICTY, defense counsels didn't have the right to translation during the appeals process? They were all like, no, these are the documents that are being resubmitted and everything that you have here has already been translated, so no, there's no need. Then defense counsels also, if they needed an extra translation or extra interpreting, they would have to pay from their own budgets, you know, because as you know, defense is not part of the court. Only prosecution is part of the court. The last, but not the least, you can read about all these things in my book. It's called Linguistic Justice Translation and Interpreting at ICTY. Last but not the least, I really dislike the use of language assistants at international criminal tribunals. These are people who are basically just like you and me, most of them, just like you and me. They completed college, they have flair for interpreting or flair for translation. They have been hired because they're speakers of the languages of lesser diffusion, but because they're language assistants, they're paid much less than us. What is the proper solution to this problem? Well, why don't you, and they do all sorts of things. They transcribe, they analyze evidence, they decide which is exculpatory, which is, and so on. Basically, they do jobs through which they also ventured into legal fora, you know. They almost do the job of a legal assistant. So what would be the solution there? Well, the solution would be, number one, to hire somebody who speaks the same language from the situation country. You know, if you're adjudicating on crimes in Ukraine, well, hire a lawyer from Ukraine who can do the legal analyst and so on. Do not hire 3 language assistants that you're going to pay peanuts and who are going to do 7 different jobs as a one person, you know, and so on. I am going to ask if we can show the inflow of words. This is a beautiful movie that I really like, that I really enjoy doing. It is made by a Dutch director. Her name is Eliane Esther Bots. And we met several years ago in The Hague. And as luck would have it, in the municipal building in The Hague, they were celebrating, I guess, 70 years since the Nuremberg trials. So they had beautiful panels with all the pictures of the interpreters who were interpreting at Nuremberg and their stories and so on. Even that one lady who stood up during the trial and said, "I love this, I want to interpret." And she retired in the 80s as a P5 from UN, God bless us. Eliana wanted to hear my personal professional story. And I do understand, I do come across as exuberant, but I'm actually rather private when it comes to my emotions, when it comes to stuff that really kind of shakes me. And we became friends, and I decided I was going to share the story that just completely almost killed me as a person, as a professional, as a man, as a Bosnian, as everything that I know. And she also interviewed my 2 other beautiful colleagues, Nenad Pops and Alma, and she made this movie. The picture itself actually won the Dutch Oscars, Gouden Kalf, Golden Cow or Calf, yeah, for the best short documentary. It won so many other international awards, and it was even featured by The New Yorker. I was a little bit apprehensive when I heard, and I really hope nobody gets offended. I was a little bit apprehensive when I heard Americans want to have a little say in this, because you know how they can sensationalize everything, you know, and I kind of felt my experience in our profession, you know, I mean, we are people from the shadows, but I don't really think that we are éminence grise, you know? We are just somebody who's super extra discreet, and that should be the way it is. So I would like you to watch the movie, and then I guess the question for me was what would be my advice for colleagues, practitioners in international criminal tribunals how to do their job. So let us see the picture and then I will tell you my advice.
Before we move to the movie, I just wanted to thank all the speakers, volunteers who made this event, made it happen, and the Bureau for their hard work and support. Dear Valeria, Emma, Angie, Carmen, Ben, Felipe, and Barbara and Louise, and you are simply the best. Now we move to the movie.
If I would make a film about myself, I would be the voiceover. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Nobody else in any conversation pays as much attention to what is being said as I do. Everything that comes out of your mouth is important. Suddenly your thoughts are my thoughts. I am you.
So I see this superhero as a lawyer, the man who leads, the man who controls the whole situation, the man who is in the courtroom. I see the animal, I see it as a witness because it's vulnerable. They were prey during the war. That's why I see a witness in this animal. The vase I associate with myself, an interpreter. The only purpose of a vase is to hold a flower, and our sole purpose here in this triangle is to provide interpretation, to facilitate the conversation, and nothing else.
I must sound composed. You don't need to know what is going on in my heart. It's important to give emotions, but I shouldn't be telling you, oh, by the way, this hurts me as well.
Do you believe that your sons are alive today?
Ne. Oni nisu živi.
No, they're not alive.
To Yankee zna, molila bi
Yankee
samo
knows that.
da zna
I
u
would
kojoj
like
grobnici.
to know in which grave they are, so that me, their mother, can give them proper burial, so I can go and visit the place where their bodies are, so I can look at their graves.
All rise. Peu levé. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia is now in session. Please be seated.
I'm safe in my bubble, between the walls of my booth, behind my glass. But then, the person I'm interpreting says something that pierces my bubble and comes back home to me. One day, in trial, we are seeing a video showing Serbian forces who are forcing this one Muslim prisoner to shout and communicate with other Muslims hiding around in the neighboring hills. He's yelling to them, "Come, come here. The Serbs are not going to harm you. They're not going to do anything to you. Don't worry, just come." I've seen that video already 7 times, and I know where the graves are of that man and of the men who are hiding up there in the hills. Something chokes in me, and I hand the microphone over to my colleague because I want to cry. I know that if I try and say one word, tears will come and strange sounds, muffled and unintelligible.
This was a hotel room where we met with one witness. It was just one of those hotel rooms that are, same everywhere. A big bed and a chair where the witness was sitting, and the two of us, the investigator and myself. While being on a mission in Scandinavia, one of the places we visited was the home of an elderly couple. We sat down with them in their living room. The painting of AIIC waterfall on the wall. The photos on the shelves were of their 2 sons. As we progressed with the statement, I learned that these 2 boys were taken to a concentration camp in 1992. They were never found, they were never returned, their remains had not been found. And the story itself was very sad and terrible, but what struck me the most was when we asked the couple or the man actually, if he would like to have protective statements, should he be called to testify. He said, "Oh yes, please, because if they hear that I am testifying in the courtroom, they might kill my boys, they might hurt them." And then I realized that they, after 8 years, they still believed that their children are alive. And that was just heartbreaking. Very, very hard to hear.
I discovered that it's very, very important to sit in the middle of legal client and a victim. And I also never wanted to look at any of them. I always looked at the side because I never really wanted to have witness or victim turn around to me and say, "Well, you explain to him. You're Bosnian, you've been through the war. Explain to him how all these things happened." Because I cannot explain anything to anyone. I'm not there. I'm a glorified phone. But several times I allowed myself to look at the victim, to start feeling for that person. And it didn't really work out very well. The last time was a couple of years ago. It was in Srebrenica. We were interviewing drivers who were driving men and boys to get killed. there was this driver, and he started to tell a story about how he drove with a boy, a Muslim boy, and they were singing with all these men waiting to be driven to execution in the trunk, in the back. And the driver said, and when we were finished, I didn't really know what to do with the boy. I called back to the headquarters, and the duty officer got up. He drove for 45 minutes. He went into the truck. He picked up a boy, took him to the bushes, and he killed him. I couldn't process it. Who gets up at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to kill a boy? I came home that evening, and I started drinking, and I was drunk for a month. I wanted the energy of that boy, I wanted it in my home. And I wanted to be devastated for him, because he didn't have anyone else to cry for him.
Omarska camp was operational for quite a long time. It's the camp that it was the first discovery by Western journalists of something really wrong going on in Bosnia. There was a taxi driver who kept coming each evening, would ask the guards to select 1 or 2 prisoners, and then he would just spend the evening beating the guy. And there was this witness, so I interpreted for him twice in courtroom, in 2 cases. And he was a doctor. He managed to get a camera smuggled in. And then he decided to do something so incredibly brave. He took photos of the people he was treating, of their wounds, of their bruises, documenting what was going on, just in case he survives and can show that to the world. He wanted to make sure that later nobody can say it didn't happen. I asked once to give me a tape of his testimony, and I have a recording somewhere. I was that impressed. It is hard to describe the situation there at that moment, at that place. There was general confusion, general chaos. People were moaning, crying. There was shooting. There's a computer, the microphones, a desk and 2 chairs. The glass of the booth is tinted. This gives me space to distance myself. I get less involved that way. It is different when I do consecutive interpretation, when I'm sitting at the same table with the witness or the accused. When I can smell them, they become more human to me, and it makes it harder to distance yourself.
Just imagine, this youngest boy I had, those little hands of his. How could they be dead?
Kako koje jutro sa ne kriješ oči
Every morning I wake up, I cover my eyes, not to look at other children going to school and husbands going to work, holding hands.
Hey. It is just words, don't worry. Take it easy, listen to me. With my voice and choice of words, I can make any sentence less of a confrontation while still giving a correct interpretation.
My first job with the ICTY was actually just upon the discovery of the secondary mass graves of Srebrenica men and boys. I was invited by Srebrenica team to accompany them to a place where they suspected there was secondary mass grave. Of course, we came prepared with the archaeologists, with excavators and all that equipment for rough digging and also for fine tuning. And they started digging. The smell of decaying flesh is just absolutely unbearable. It was very overpowering. I didn't really want to approach the area. I didn't really want to go and see. One of the archaeologists started talking to me and she said, well, did you go to see the corpses and so on? And I said, no. And she said, why don't you go and see what they did to your people? And then I looked at her and I thought to myself, well, she's absolutely right. If I was born 20 kilometers to the right, this could have been my corpse in this mass grave. And I got up and I went to see. I looked at all those corpses there and their smell wasn't all that overpowering for me anymore. I looked at them and I said the Muslim prayer for the dead. And I felt good about myself and felt good about what I have done, that I saw them, that could have been me.
Yeah, I didn't like going to the detention unit because I didn't like having any sort of contact with the accused. I don't feel comfortable because I met their victims and I worked with their victims first, and all of a sudden I'm thrown into the detention unit to interpret for the person responsible for their sufferings. You know, I suffered during the war and I understand the suffering of the people who came to testify. But it is weird when you meet a guy who was in the paramilitaries and like 5 minutes before he was talking about capturing guys, putting a rat on his stomach, covering the rat with a pot and heating the pot so that the rat could dig out the guts of the guy who was alive. Can you imagine that? He said that story in the proofing session.
like, I don't want to be, alone in the room with this guy. Protect me. You feel uncomfortable because had we met 15 years ago, I would have been the victim, for sure.
There was a story about these two famous doctors, actually, and they were put into concentration camps because they were Muslim intellectuals. They kept them in the toilet. And the guards, they would come there, they would just bring them out, they would beat them up. And I think that they actually killed them by beating both of them. And I kept on having a reoccurring dream that I'm actually in the toilet and that the concentration camp guard is knocking at my door. And I called my grandmother and I told her about the dream. And she told me, Besmir, do you know who they were, those people who were knocking at your door? And I said, no, I don't. She said, they were actually angels. They were there to let you know that you're doing your job right. The knowledge that somebody might be looking at me and scrutinizing my interpretation really helped me to do my job the way the dead people I'm interpreting about would want me to. I said to myself, well, I'm going to be the best fucking interpreter there was. If there are angels watching or the ghosts of those dead people, well, you know what, guys? You can count on me.
So, thank you for watching the movie. How many of you saw the movie more than once? Yes. We showed the movie in UN, in Geneva, actually. It became a kind of like a cult movie already in our little community. When I posted a link to the New Yorker magazine, 20,000 people saw it. 20,000 people. I mean, you can actually go and look at the statistics to see who they are. 80% of those people are legal professionals. So it explains something to them as well, the movie here. As you can see, in the movie itself, there is no music, there is no narrator, so nobody is guiding your feelings. Whatever you're feeling, that's you. And that's, I guess, something that I probably appreciate the most about it. It gave me an opportunity to explain, just like to explain, to give advice to younger generations of interpreters who may find themselves in the same situation. Just like you saw when I was interpreting at the mass graves, number one, you are not better than any of those people. This could happen to you as well. And number two, when I was interpreting the story of the boy,
which was absolutely devastating for me. I was actually employing a visualization technique. So I stopped taking notes and I just started visualizing. And of course I was in the truck, I was singing, I was happy. When job was done, I fell asleep. And then I feel somebody is moving me and that's it. I don't feel anything else. The thing is that I was interpreting as I. So be careful with visualization technique and separate your I from the I on whose behalf you are interpreting. This is a huge deal. What has happened when I said that I was drunk for a month, I wasn't joking. I was drunk for a little bit over a month. I was living in squalor. I would wake up in the morning, I couldn't make myself to go and take a shower. Because I wanted him, I wanted him to be there with me. And then I would start with wine just to, to pick me up a little bit, and then move on to beer. And when it was like 11 or midnight in the evening, I would go with whiskey just to calm me down so I can fall asleep. And at a certain point, I even started hallucinating. My boyfriend at the time actually broke in and just rescued me from the whole situation. So that advice would be, it's not only you, it is okay to be broken to fucking bits of nothing. It's fine. You have to get over it. It was, I'm not trying to minimize my experience in any way, but it was very easy for me to swoon about my apartment for 6 months. I didn't have any kids. I didn't have any, partners, What about if it happens to you and you have obligations? You cannot really just put them aside. The last thing, of course, last advice that you heard from it all, just we do have all these techniques, we do have all these things that we do, but the bottom line is, if you're interpreting about dead people, raped people, tortured people, and so on, do it in the way that they would want you to do. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, that was very powerful. Thank you again, Besmir. And of course, yeah, as you said, all the resilience techniques, interpreters need them. We don't always have time to get trained. We don't plan wars, natural disasters and the like, and to have enough interpreters in the right language pairs when these things happen. But we all have to really bear in mind that witness trauma is very real, and we all learn from you. We all bow to you, and we'll have to learn from your experience to make ourselves more resilient and hopefully kinder, nicer humans. And could we please reserve the right to ask our amazing speakers some more questions, maybe via social media, because I know there is some backlog and there is possibly some sent online. We might not have time tonight, but I very much hope that you will stay and enjoy the refreshments, and maybe ask the speakers, those who are present in the room, but maybe those who are not present, who are present online, and we didn't have time for the questions, maybe you will still collate them, and we'll write to our lovely speakers. Thank you so much.
Could I just say one thing?
Yes, of course. Andrew.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to say a word of thanks for this film. Okay. I've avoided seeing it. It's hard. I've avoided seeing this film. But thank you. Just trying to get back. Yeah, I've avoided seeing this film. It was a tough watch, but I think it's important to remember what we're doing. Like you say, who it's for, and it's for everybody, and that's what gets us through. So, yeah, thank you again. It was a very brave thing to do.